Hello, once again, everyone. I'm your host, Ray Shasho, and welcome to another edition of Interviewing the Legends, brought to you by the Rockstar Chronicles. Series 1, my new book featuring over 45 intimate conversations with the greatest music legends the world will ever know. Available now at bookbaby.com and amazon.com, featuring Mr. Ian Anderson. Well, Jethro Tull has recently released their first studio album of new material in over 18 years entitled The Zella Gene, available now on amazon.com. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome multi-instrumentalist, singer, songwriter, composer, and band leader for the legendary Jethro Tull and my personal rock and roll hero, Mr. Ian Anderson, to Interviewing the Legends. Hello, Ian. How are you?
I'm very well. Thank you for asking. I hope you are too. And isn't it sad that we have to begin this by saying available at Amazon.com? We used to say available at any good record store somewhere near you. Sadly, buying things in a record store doesn't seem very likely. There are a few record stores still left, I accept, but they are very few and far between, one perhaps in a major city. So yes, everything these days is order it online or even download it or stream it in a purely digital context. So the world is very different from a record buying standpoint compared to 15, 20 years ago, let alone back in the 70s when people listened to vinyl.
Yes.
Now that they're listening to vinyl once again, or at least a few thousand are, then it makes my life an absolute misery because I deliver an album to a record company and I have to wait another 9 months at least before it can be released due to the horrendous lead time it takes for pressing and manufacturing vinyl records. So we're all caught up in that retro nostalgic time warp, which has affected production schedules everywhere.
I'm with you on that. First, I'd like to say that we are saddened by the passing of Gary Brooker. The last concert I saw in Maryland, I'm originally from the DC area. I live in Florida now. Before moving here, was a Jethro Tull concert with Procol Harum at the Merriweather Post in Maryland. And I just wanted to get that out because he was a great artist, and I know you were very close to Gary.
Well, I have to be quite truthful. I wasn't close to Gary. No. I met him a few times because we shared the same stage. I mean, right. A nod and a wink, hello, hi, how are you? That was about it.
Oh, okay.
But nonetheless, I did perform once with Gary Brooker when he performed A Whiter Shade of Pale on a major, big music German television program, and I played the iconic organ line originally played by Matthew Fisher. I actually played that on the flute in accompanying Gary and a house band, and I noticed that the keyboard player was looking daggers at me when I was playing the line, which I'd been asked to do by the record producer, by the TV producer. I didn't want to play on it. I just said, "You've got to do this. We really want you on this thing with Gary." So I said, "Okay." And so I learned the organ part on the flute, and I looked around at the keyboard player kind of half apologetically for stealing his line, and then realized in horror, it was actually Matthew Fisher. He was there playing it. Boy, was his nose out of joint.
That's funny. I want to say there's a few of your musical acquaintances that wanted to give you a shout out today. Leslie Mandoki Soulmates. You did some work with him, and I covered Leslie a couple of times recently. Utopia for Realists, and you are on that album. And of course, you did the duo with him on We Say Thank You, which I love very much, by the way. You also played on Robbie Steinhardt's Not in Kansas Anymore. Michael Franklin sends his best to you. He says your contributions are deeply appreciated. I just wanted to get that out as well.
Well, I'm usually able a few times in a year to fulfill some small guest role on other people's records, and I get asked to do it a lot, and I usually have to say no because of time constraints. But if it's something outside of my musical orbit, then is more of a challenge. So sometimes I do things that might be considered a little unlikely, like appearing on William Shatner's spoken word Christmas album, which was was quite a stretch to do that. But I wasn't actually really a Star Trek fan, but I did meet William Shatner once on a TV show and found him a very gracious and intelligent, nice guy, although his reputation was not necessarily that good.
Right.
But he was certainly very nice to me. And so I thought, well, yeah, sure, I'll do that. And then I found myself on an album, not only with William Shatner, but with Iggy Pop and Billy Gibbons from ZZ Top and Rick Wakeman and a whole bunch of other folks that rather like me had risen to the challenge of facing absurdity full on.
You're on tour right now, right? Didn't you start February 18th in Portugal? Is that right?
Well, we were actually on tour in Italy at the beginning of February, and then we came back from Portugal at early this week, and then there's a bit of a gap before we go off to Spain and other places and continue on through the year with a lot of concerts that have been rescheduled from 2020 and 2021. But we did in fact do quite a few concerts from the end of August through to December. So we've dipped our toe in the touring water in a number of different countries and gone through that experience of COVID-related travel issues and all of the complexities that, if you're used to working within, the confines of one country, then maybe you get used to it, but the rules are constantly changing. And so it's quite a feat of planning and being very mindful of local rules, regulations, and protocols that apply specifically in the pandemic context. So we are always having to do that extra work these days. It's not as easy as it used to be to go on tour. Are
you planning on coming back to the States after this tour, or?
Well, I discussed that with my agent back in 2020, and we decided that 2021 was really too close, that the mess that COVID had left meant that, no one could be sure about anything. And the number of concerts already being rescheduled meant availabilities and venues was very restricted. And that applies in 2020 as well. So we're talking about 2023, and he is yet to come back to me with some suggestions of some tour date schedules that make sense. But he will be having the same problem as he's had in the last 2 years, trying to find a Wednesday night in the such and such performing arts center in wherever place it might be, that it's just so difficult to find availabilities.
Well, I want to tell you, I really enjoyed the Zella Gene. It's a great album. Enjoyed it a lot. I'm going to pick some tracks out that I really liked. The one that really sticks out to me on the album is Mine is the Mountain. Very different, a bit scary sometimes. I want to.
Go ahead.
So some of the lyrics I want to tell my audience how it is. So think of me finally, in spite of the raging, the ranting, the raving, the threatening tone, for I am the Father, the power, and the glory. And now, for God's sake, kindly leave me alone. Mine is the mountain. I mean, the lyrics are incredible. I love this song.
Well, in some ways, it's a little bit of a parallel to the song My God from the Aqualung album. But, I am speaking perhaps irreverently with the voice of the Old Testament vengeful God here, talking, rather irritated by the demands placed upon him by, in this case, Moses. The idea of an interventionist God does not appeal to me. I mean, right now, if it was an interventionist God there to answer the prayers and requests of humankind, he'd be facing a bit of a dilemma in Russia, where perhaps 40% of Russians right at the moment would be beseeching God to, bless Vlad the Bad and wish him all the speedy entrance into taking over Ukraine and restoring it to being part of Mother Russia. Whilst another 40% of Russians would be beseeching that God to make Putin give up his aspirations of invasion and subjugation. And God would have a real problem, deciding, well, whose side am I on here? Am I going to support Vlad the Bad, or am I going to look after the poor people of Ukraine who have a right to their sovereign national state? And then, of course, there's the 20% who just don't give a shit, who might be asking for, the inside track as to who was going to win the football match next Sunday so they could place a bet. The idea of an interventionist God does not appeal to me at all. So I'm making light of that absurdity as I see it, but that's not to suggest that I am belittling biblical text, because I think everyone should read the Bible and everybody should dip their toes in the Quran, regardless of their faith, and learn a little bit about some of the traditional Eastern religions of Hinduism, for example, which are all worth knowing something about, and having a spiritual awareness to help you in your own quest, if indeed you are motivated to have such a quest. And of course, a lot of people just can't be bothered. But
in our last meeting, you told me you had a copy of the Bible and also the Quran in your iPhone. Yeah. That's
and several books on the subjects of comparative religion, and discussions, quite theosophical discussions, which I think is something that it doesn't do any harm to hear what people have to say.
I agree,
but it can be harmful if you believe what any one of them says, because there are obviously other sides to the story, other opinions, other viewpoints, and other arguments to be made. But I think, let's have those arguments in a gentle and spiritual way. When the arguments take to Twitter, however, they can be damaging, dangerous, divisive, and thoroughly brutal, as in the case of certain ex-presidents who won't lie down and go away. But the manipulation of media is something, again, takes us right back to the Russia of today, that what's being spun to the Russian people. I mean, I know this from talking to friends in Russia in the last few days. They're not getting, unless they have access to the internet and read the international press unfettered. If they're watching TV or listening to the radio or reading the newspapers locally, they have a totally distorted view of what's going on and why it's going on. So manipulation of media, which is pretty much really controlled by the Kremlin. That is something that I think is against the principles to which most journalists would be their profound belief, their reason perhaps for becoming journalists, is to be able to investigate and tell the truth in an unfettered way. The idea of being controlled by the state is an anathema, I think, to any self-respecting journalist anywhere.
Exactly. Well, back to the album real quick. The Zella Gene. I was a top 40 DJ back in the late 70s, so I always pick on albums what would be the top 40 hit. And I think the Zealot Gene would be the top 40 hit. It's a great tune. I love the animation. It's great.
Well, that's nothing to do with me. The record company are the folks who bring their expertise and experience to bear in marketing and promotion by commissioning promotional videos, which are, unless I violently disagree with them, I'll go along with the flow, because that's not my job. My creative role finishes when I hand over the master tapes and the artwork for the album. What happens after that is the brutal, savage world of selling something to the public. I mean, for when it comes to being a Mercedes dealership, I'll leave that to Sony Records rather than attempt to be selling people either new or used cars.
I understand totally. I'm an author, and I know how hard it is to sell a book. Some of the other songs. What one track I'd like to ask you about is the Betrayal. Is it Joshua? Is it Kindy or Kind? How do you spell the last name there? How do you?
Well, it's just an invented name, Kind.
Okay,
Kynde. It sounds like an old English name,
okay,
but it is
very clever.
Kind. Yes. Well,
Yeah.
it's too clever, probably too clever for its own good. But yes, I'm talking about betrayal, not necessarily only the betrayal of Jesus in the Bible, but I'm talking about betrayal as a human emotion, something that causes people huge upset when they realize they've been betrayed, whether it is whether it is revenge porn, or whether it's people in a relationship who feel let down by their partner or their companion or their business partner. I mean, betrayal is something that I guess it happens to all of us somewhere along the way, and sadly, some of us are the betrayers. We are the originators. So it's a human emotion. It's a powerful one and worthy of another song on the album, since that's what the album is about. It is it is about each song about a different powerful human emotion. So the song of betrayal, yes, it alludes here and there to the story of Jesus, but it's not in any way bound up. It actually began, funnily enough, the first draft of the lyrics had nothing whatsoever to do with anything biblical. It had to do with it was set in a kind of Cold War espionage context of betrayal, betraying one's country for perhaps some misunderstood ideological mission. And but then I changed it along the way. So second and third drafts turned into the version we have now.
The Fisherman of Ephesus, that finishes the album. Very tall track. A
song about guilt survival.
Yeah.
I remember meeting some folks who survived, tragedies in Afghanistan and Iraq, who lost their buddies and survived to come back to the USA and try and pick up the pieces, but with that terrible feeling that never leaves them, that they lived whilst their platoon was massacred or taken out with landmines and bombs and sniper fire and whatever else. And it is a very powerful emotion. I remember a special service, ex-special services guy who was a firearms trainer for the Navy SEALs. And he was telling me, I asked him, about his expertise, since he'd been kind enough to loan me his own personal 10mm Glock. Oh, wow. I thought I would ask him about his experiences, and he started to tell me about being in service overseas and what happened, and he just broke down in tears. It was you could see how powerful that was even many years later. Oh yeah, that terrible feeling. And so in a way I'm talking about that, but the biblical parallel is that of the Apostle John, who was the only survivor amongst the 12 disciples who met gory ends, apart from John, who nearly didn't make it, but did actually die of old age as a continuing in his evangelical work on the coast of Turkey at a beautiful amphitheater, a Roman amphitheater called Ephesus, where I had the privilege of playing back in 1991, and since visited as a tourist. And so that Ephesus has a little place in my personal heart.
I guess your opinions on God, Christianity, I guess in music started with My God, and then the next track, Hymn 43, which I guess you can say depicts Jesus as a man who is worn out from all the horrible things that people have done and blamed him for. And your views are right on, they're spot on.
Well, it's my interest in religion goes back to being a young teenager, when I had to do, I think twice a week we had a class in religious instruction. And instruction, literally, we were being instructed as to what to believe. It wasn't religious studies, right? It wasn't a comparative religion lessons. It was an instruction in what we should believe as adherents of the Church of England, essentially.
Yeah.
So I was curious and interested by what I saw as the areas in which that period of lessons was missing a whole bunch of stuff that I really wanted to know about, and we weren't given access to, namely other religions and understanding about the history of religion and the history of how we came to be a Christian nation.
Right.
That was never on offer, and indeed the headmaster, who was an ordained minister, got really pretty annoyed with me for asking questions that I felt obliged to ask. So I've always had that interest since being, from the age of 14 onwards. And it's not really about having viewpoints. My viewpoints are always, shifting a little this way and that way. But I call myself a very spiritual person, and I'm a huge supporter of Christianity without referring to myself as being a Christian.
Right.
I see no problem with supporting something, but not necessarily having the credentials. I don't have faith in the sense that a Christian would be expected to have faith. I believe not in certainties, because faith implies certainty. I don't believe in certainties. I believe in probabilities and possibilities.
Sure.
High on my list of probabilities is that there was a Jesus of Nazareth who did more or less what he's described as doing in the New Testament. But Jesus, the Christ, the Son of God, that is for me more of a symbolic position, and one that I heartily support because of all of the positive sides of Christianity, and giving a message, a set of values that are of benefit to society as a whole. Other people might get it from the Quran or from Hinduism or Judaism, but for many of us, it's growing up in the so-called Christian world, and I suppose we find it easier to adopt those values, or indeed to criticize them, because far from me to criticize Islam. I am not of that culture or that background, and so I would never be critical of other religions in the way that I would be prepared to be critical of Christianity. But that doesn't mean that I am in any way whatsoever anti-Christian.
Sure. Quite
the opposite. I put my money where my mouth is by raising tens, hundreds of thousands of pounds in support of cathedrals and churches, and not only in the UK but elsewhere in Western Europe. So I'm a huge active supporter of the Christian Church, but I don't subscribe to the faith in the way that other people do.
Yeah, I was brought up with the Catholic guilt.
Yes, well, my wife was brought up within the Catholic faith, and when I played at the Vatican Christmas concert in December, and
wow,
and
that's incredible.
And apart from meeting Frank for the obligatory meet and greet and the 5-second handshake. We were each given a piece of Vatican merch,
cool.
And the merch was a set of rosary beads.
Really?
And I jokingly gave them to my wife, thinking she would just toss them in the bin, but she actually took them and really was very touched by having rosary beads from the Vatican. Yeah, even though she's not she was brought up within the Catholic teaching and tradition, but she was actually Church of England. Right. She wasn't bona fide a Roman Catholic, but you can see how many of these things still have a huge value for people, and I think she will be a happier recipient of the Vatican merch stand than I would. I was rather hoping for a mug with a picture of Frank on it, or the T-shirt or something.
A T-shirt would be cool. Yeah, exactly.
Oh, well, they do have them. It's just not what we were handed out by one of the cardinal's assistants in the Vatican, who was handing out the merch to us as we were after our brief meet and greet with Frank.
Yeah, very cool. Do you think as a the human beings that we are, we should be working on all the unanswered questions of life, like where do we come from, where do we go after we die, are we alone in the universe, why are we here, the meaning of life, is there a God? Do you think we should be working harder at those questions? It doesn't seem like, we get distracted or something.
I think a lot more of us are perhaps not diligently working, but aware of and conscious of the big questions. We just find it difficult to talk about. We're embarrassed, I think, to talk about spiritual matters amongst each other. And it's, I think more people do have a spiritual awareness and do confront those big questions. But the answer to those big questions, unfortunately, you're not going to find on the History Channel and amongst the conspiracy theorists who talk about aliens and various stuff. I mean, it's amusing. It's not irrelevant or useless, but you shouldn't get caught up in that stuff because I think really we live in a world that is so potentially complex in a material and secular way that when we add in the complexities of spiritual possibilities, then it really can be utterly confusing and cause many people just to overload and just turn their attention back to sitcoms and sports events rather than thinking about the big questions. But the one thing we could be sure of, if there was ever a visitation in the physical sense from beings from another planet, another civilization, the first question on everybody's lips would be, is there a God? That would be the biggie. Why are we here? Who made all this? Is there a God? I mean, that would be and it would be the most dangerous question to ask, because imagine if that alien being said, oh yeah, funny you asked that, but yes, indeed there is. And by the way, I'm Jewish. Imagine what that's going to do to the rest of us. So you can imagine, we would ask those questions perhaps naively, but without being able maybe to take on board the implications of the answer, especially if that answer was, well, I have to tell you, no, there is no God. This is just one almighty cosmic explosion at the beginning of time. And it is a completely random universe of destruction and mayhem. And we somehow have come out of that as living creatures and developing into sentient beings. But, God, afraid you got that one wrong. I mean, imagine the effect of that globally. I mean, at least half of the planet would slit its wrists.
Oh yeah, definitely.
It would be a terrible thing to hear.
Yeah.
So, I think these are obviously not just big questions, but perhaps big questions about which we should not be necessarily expecting the answers or be able to comprehend or cope with the answers should we ever finally have them.
The Zella Gene and the animation with the sperm, it makes you think, which blows my mind. We were like little tadpoles. That's how we started. And where were we before we were little tadpoles? And how come certain people just made it to the egg, and others did not? I mean, that whole concept just blows me away.
Well, yes, I mean, it may well be that we are these little tadpoles, and what were we before that? Well, I, for one, was one almighty erection. Before the tadpoles erupted forth. Well, it's the sperm has nothing whatsoever. That was not my idea. That was I won't mention the name of the animator. I'm sure you can find that out. But it's interesting. He's a charming Iranian would-be filmmaker living in a high-rise apartment somewhere in Tehran. And if the authorities knew his name and his address, he would probably end up in jail, especially after the sperm. So. It's the record company commissioned that stuff.
Right.
And
is that the
so,
title of a new track, The Mighty Erection?
well,
next?
it's no, I have written most of the ingredients of the next Jethro Tull album,
Oh, good, good, good,
starting
good.
work on to January the 1st of this year. So my next task during the few weeks ahead of me are to make demos for the band so they can learn and prepare in time
Awesome.
for the recording sessions we will start in June.
Great.
To have an end of March 2023 release.
Awesome. Awesome. You know, your voice sounds awesome. It sounds incredible now. I don't know what you did to it, but it sounds, back to vintage Tull again, vintage Ian Anderson. So
Well, I'm an aging baritone.
yeah,
I'm a low
exactly.
baritone, and for me, singing in the rock kind of context,
Mhm.
I pushed myself to the limits back in sort of 82,
Right.
83, 84. And that was, me trying to be Lou Gramm.
Yeah.
And it was a big mistake because there is only one Lou Gramm. And,
Right.
just as Robert Plant, I mean, he is there in a parallel universe of
Yeah.
vocal dynamics and expertise that most of us couldn't even dream of. So, I knew back then, in fact, when we were touring with Zeppelin, I mean, I knew there's no
Mhm.
point in me trying to be that kind of a singer.
Right.
I tended to work within my range, but I pushed myself too far in 82 and
Mhm.
84. And these days, I stay within that range of a low baritone. So, I still have to sing songs like Locomotive Breath in the original
Mhm.
key and Thick as a Brick and so on. But, it's okay here and there. You've got notes that you've got to go for at the end of the end of the range up or down. But I have to sing a few high E's. Well, for me, high
Mhm.
E's during a live show. But if I had too many of them, it would be pushing
Yeah.
myself probably beyond an acceptable limit. So and other notable baritones. I mean, I would have said David Bowie
Mhm.
was essentially a baritone, although he could extend into a slightly higher baritone range. And then you've got the low baritones or even a bass like Bing Crosby. But,
Right.
Frank Sinatra, a notable
Sure.
baritone singer, kind of mid baritone range.
Yeah.
And, some of the greatest singers have been those that didn't have the vocal pyrotechnics of the great rock singers that we're familiar with, the rock tenors.
Mhm.
And for me, Lou Gramm is the number one. He is just the most perfect singer, great diction, great pitching,
Mhm.
great phrasing, and he is absolutely the master of the rock tenor art.
Mhm.
The fact that he's American and sings with an American accent, that's the only problem for me. But at least he's American, whereas a lot of the
Yeah.
imitators from my side of the Atlantic who do wannabe American accents it's
Yeah.
always irritated me a bit.
Lou just played a show here. I'm in Florida, and he played at Anna Maria Island, which is about 20 minutes from me. So he's still out there rocking and rolling.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I follow his activities from time to time. I met him
Yeah.
once, and we
Hmm.
actually did play together. But I think it was a live television show, and I don't think I think we did one or two Lou Gramm's foreigner songs. But
Hmm.
for some reason, I think the producers decided to edit his part out of this
Huh.
major TV show, and so those of us who took the trouble to learn the songs and rehearse with Lou and do the recording for the TV, I guess we were a little disappointed that
Yeah.
we never finally got to be on national television in Europe without as part of that experience. But I did on the same show. I played with,
Right.
let's see, I played with Jack Bruce doing "Sunshine of Your
Hmm.
Love," with
Yeah.
Gary Brooker doing "Whiter Shade of Pale,"
Yeah.
with Eric Burden doing a string
Yep.
quartet. Eric Burden and I,
Hmm.
House of the Rising Sun.
Wow.
So it was an interesting show to do, but sadly we didn't lose bit. I don't think made it to the final cut of what was shown on German television to
Yeah.
20 million people who tuned in for that. Anyway, never mind. I must go. Nice to talk to
Okay.
you, and good luck
E-
with whatever it is you're doing next.
Ian, thank you so much for joining us today. I really mean that. You are my number one rock hero, and I always respect everything you talk about.
It's very nice of you to say that, but I bet you say that to all the girls.
Yeah, I tell everybody you are my hero, and I've interviewed a lot of guys.
Okay.
Thank you,
good to talk
Ian.
to you, and take good care. Bye-bye.
You too. God bless you. Bye-bye.